Hi everybody, it's Kim from Patriot Garden, and today we're going to talk about all things tomatoes, including to prune or not to prune. So I'm here at the chicken run because I wanted to show you something really cool. When we first started this chicken run, it was grass. The chickens very quickly ate through all the grass, and then it was pretty much barren ground. And to keep them busy, I very often would throw in a bale of peat moss, maybe sprinkled with some scratch grains, so that they would have something to do during the day. Well, fast forward 4 years, and this ground is compost heaven. And I've taken a lot of this compost to dress my beds before I planted, including my tomatoes. And you're going to see the results of that today. Let me just show you what it looks like. Hi girls, I hope you don't mind. We're going to do some digging in here for just a sec. I just want you to take a look at this. It's probably about, I want to say 10 inches or so down of this beautiful compost that's a mixture of straw that we put on the run in the wintertime to keep their feet from being on the snow, and the peat moss that I throw in here about twice a season so that they have something fun to scratch through, and of course chicken manure. And just look at the quality of this compost. So I've been dressing my beds with this stuff before I get planted. I'm also going to be in a couple of weeks top dressing with this as well. And I'm hoping to share some with friends. I've told them to bring along some 5-gallon buckets, and they can take what they need for their gardens as well. This stuff is like black gold, and I'm very lucky to have it. So now let's go take a look at the tomatoes. We're going to talk about pruning today. Pruning is a touchy subject, I am guessing, from watching the social media conversations on gardening platforms. There are just as many people that advocate for pruning as there are people that advocate for no pruning and letting tomatoes do what tomatoes are going to do. And I come down somewhere in the middle. Let's talk about the rationales for pruning and some techniques that you might be able to use. My tomato plants are certainly thriving. These are only about 3 weeks planted in the garden, and I credit it to that beautiful compost from the chicken run. But also, when I plant my tomatoes, I added a small sprinkling of Epsom salts for magnesium. You certainly don't want to overdo that, but at the beginning of planting, a little sprinkling is not bad. I also put in some crushed eggshells for calcium. Calcium strengthens the cell walls of a plant so that they grow nice, strong stems. I put in a small sprinkling of general tomato fertilizer, and I also sprinkled the roots of each tomato plant with mycose. I spoke about mycose in a previous video. Mycose is a mycorrhizal fungi inoculant, and mycorrhizal fungi establishes a symbiotic relationship with the plant, where the plant helps to provide nutrients for the fungi, and the fungi helps draw up water and nutrients for the plant. And I think that combination of amendments really worked. But of course, we're here to talk about pruning, so let's get to it. Now, one thing that's important to remember with any technique, whether it is succession planting or interplanting, intercropping, or crop rotation, or even pruning, is that all of these techniques have been evolving from commercial farmers. And of course, here on a homestead or on a small hobby farm or home garden, the techniques for a commercial farmer are not something that we need to worry about all the time. I don't care how long it takes my tomatoes to produce fruit. I'm just going to enjoy the process of watching my plants grow. If I'm a commercial farmer, I've got to meet deadlines, and I've also got to meet quotas for quantity. Some of the techniques certainly are helpful, and in the case of pruning, one of the most important things that pruning does is it keeps the leaves away from the dirt. Many of the diseases that tomatoes can get, and even some of those nasty insects and bugs that will eat at your garden, come from the soil. Like a slug is not going to fly up into the higher leaves. It's going to get leaves close to the bottom that are sitting there. The important thing to remember about tomatoes is they are naturally a vining plant. If you did not stake tomatoes and you just let them grow, they would just vine all over, almost like a pumpkin. The cool thing about tomatoes is wherever their stem touches the ground, they will root. So what we're doing usually in a home garden is training tomatoes to do something that is not natural for them, to grow vertically on one stalk and on some sort of a trellis or a stake. So we're already interrupting its natural inclinations. Now, I don't have a whole lot of problem with disease. I have had good years. I have had bad years. But one of the reasons why I like to prune, number one, is I have limited space here in the garden. And if I prune my tomato plants, I can fit more plants in a smaller area. I like to pack as many tomato plants as I can in my space. I like to try new varieties. I want to have a few plants of each variety. Too many leaves means restricted airflow, and that's not going to be good overall for the health of my plants. Pruning runs the gambit from very light pruning to very heavy and severe pruning. When a commercial grower is growing in a greenhouse, for instance, and they want to keep that airflow going, they will literally prune down to one stem with only leaves at the top. And they will continuously prune so that there are no leaves lower than the last cluster of fruit. That's pretty severe pruning. I have, in the past couple of years, had very good luck keeping my tomato plants healthy by keeping probably about a foot or so between the last branch or the last cluster of fruit and the ground. When the tomato plant starts to set its fruit and the fruit is growing, sometimes you wonder why it's not ripening. And it's important to prune so that the sun can actually get to the fruit and ripen it. Now, don't worry about the plant. The plant needs leaves for photosynthesis, and it doesn't need a lot of leaves. As long as your plant looks healthy, it is getting what it needs in terms of the sugars produced through photosynthesis. The rest of the leaves are just not necessary for that plant to be healthy. And as I said to someone on social media the other day, I want to grow fruit, not leaves. So I'm not really interested in big bushy tomato plants. I want my plants to look neat. I want to be able to pack more in a smaller space, and I want to grow the fruit, not the leaves. Now, this is a good example of a tomato plant I have done nothing to. This has been planted for about 3 weeks. I haven't even staked it yet, and it's got to be staked soon because you don't want to stake it too late, because then the root system could be damaged by pushing that stake into the ground. I also don't want all of this lower leaf growth because it is too close to the ground. Now, even though I water very close to the base of the tomato, and I do mulch to keep disease spores from splashing up when I do water, it is a good idea to take off that lower growth. It's not doing anybody any good. It's not necessary, and so it's going to come off. So I'm going to take my really sharp clippers, and I'm literally going to go and take off this lower growth. Now you can see a tomato plant grows with one main stem. Every inch or so is a main branch. It's just a leaf branch. This is not going to produce fruit. Now you'll notice that it also produces what's called suckers. These little suckers will actually become another main stem if you let them grow. But because I like to keep my tomatoes to one main stem, I'm going to get rid of those suckers. Now remember, everything that you take off the plant means that the energy produced by the plant is going to be allocated to something else. So if I take off the suckers, that's more energy that can be allocated toward fruit later on. So I'm just going to go in, as you can see this little sucker right here, I'm going to take this off. Now these suckers, if they were bigger, I might just put them in a glass of water and root them, and I could actually succession plant with tomatoes. Here's another little sucker right here. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to take that off. Okay, now you'll also notice that this plant, I'm going to get in a little closer so you can see. This plant has its first cluster that will eventually become flowers and fruit. And like I said, I don't want to leave that there because the plant is only about 3 weeks planted. I want it to put more energy into developing a strong root system and a nice strong stem. So as heartbreaking as it is, I'm getting rid of it. We've got the main stem. I'm going to move my camera a bit. We've got this main stem. We've got a lot of leafy growth down below. I see a sucker there. And you might notice that I have let this sucker go so long, I believe that this is the sucker, that it's almost difficult to tell which is the main branch. But I am going to assume that this is the main branch and this is the sucker, just because of where it is in relation to this leaf branch. So I'm going to actually take that off so that I don't have a whole other branch happening. All right, so let's just come in. I'm going to take sucker and branch off down there. Keep this nice and clean. This is a midnight pear. Now usually with cherry tomato, I'm going to leave that branch. Okay, now, so I'm actually going to go in and take that off. Now, the last thing about pruning is there are two types of tomato plants. You've probably heard this a million times before. There are indeterminate tomato plants that will just continue to push through their growing tip and get taller and taller and produce fruit until they die at the end of the season. Now, there's also determinate plants. Now, determinate plants are more like, if I were to relate it to beans, I would say it is the bush bean versus the runner bean. They look like a bushier plant, and they are going to set a certain amount of fruit, and then they're going to stop, no matter how long the growing season is. I only have one kind of determinate tomatoes here in my garden this year, and that is a Roma paste tomato. Usually paste tomatoes are determinate varieties, so I'm not going to be doing a lot of pruning. I'm just going to take off those bottom leaves. So that's it. I think we covered everything about pruning. Really, it is personal preference. And according to the stories I read online, people that don't prune still can get really good harvests of tomatoes. So if you look at your garden as a classroom, if you look at your garden as a place for experimentation, try some things. Prune some tomatoes and let others do what they're going to do. Keep them staked or not. Just let them vine out and see what happens. Okay, if this video was helpful for you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, the bell for notifications, leave any questions or comments, and as always, happy gardening.